Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Artist Insight, where we spotlight some of the best visual artists in the Kansas City metro area. My name is Brian Vole, and I'm the local arts librarian for Johnson County Library. Our mission for Artist Insight is to share conversations with artists about their work, their background, and what inspires them. Before we get to our guest, just a note about the growing list of interviews we have in the Artist Insight archive located at jocolibrary.org in the Library on Demand tile in the middle of the page. There you'll find videos with conversations with local artists and a note about exhibitions. Johnson County's Johnson County Library's visual arts program celebrating the work of local visual artists with artwork available free to the public at most of the Johnson County Library locations. You can visit jocolibrary.org/events/exhibitions to see a full list of our artists and where they're showing, as well as interviews with each of them. And one of those artists we're speaking with today is our guest, Patti Streeper. Trained as a printmaker, Patti Streeper focused on abstract monotypes early in her artistic career. She eventually returned to her art and began painting as her form of expression. Through experimentation and exploration, she gradually began to focus on portraiture as a means of storytelling. Drawing on her own experience as a female leader, Streeper gravitated to the stories of accomplished yet largely unknown women. A thread that runs throughout her work is a passion about human potential and how to tap into that potential to enable growth and greater contribution. Central to her beliefs is that women's leadership, when authentically expressed, is critical to the vitality and longevity of society, as she herself states, exceptional human traits, no gender or race. Courage, determination, passion, perseverance, these are the characteristics of human potential and are possible in all people regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, background, or belief. This series of visual biographies is a collection of oil portraits of women uh, from history or women presently making history who deserve to be acknowledged and honored for their accomplishments, dedication, and willingness to take a stand for the sake of opportunity for themselves and others. With this work, my goal is to spark curiosity and encourage the viewer to learn more about what comprises women's work and to inspire conversation about the contributions of all women. You can see Patti Streeper's work at the Central Resource Library until December 21st this year. Patti, welcome. It's great to
Thank,
have you.
thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. There is a lot to talk about with your work, and I'm looking forward to learning more about you as an artist and about your background. So let's start talking about uh, who you are and what is your background as a person and an artist.
Yeah, so in that intro, you mentioned that I had been trained as a printmaker. So art has always been a passion of mine. I remember as a small child, I would constantly be drawing or coloring or, making something, creating something. And so I pursued that into my education and have a fine arts degree. And then left that direct expression, if you will, for a while and pursued a corporate career at Hallmark. I was never on the board, so to speak, or as an artist, but I did a variety of different things surrounding the art and the product. And after some time in that kind of a role and away from creativity, I was encouraged by my husband to get back into something that involves self-expression, and so I began to paint. And that was roughly 10 years ago. So um, it's funny because as a printmaker, you mentioned the monotypes. Everyone in my studio classes early on kept telling me I was a painter, and I kept refusing that. For whatever reason, I didn't like that moniker at that time. But so when I came back to creating, I found painting to be more accessible than printmaking, and so I pursued that, and so here we are.
Now, you mentioned that you started painting 10 years ago. Um, and so I I wonder if you can take us through more deeply your beginnings as an artist, about what inspired you, even with printmaking in the earliest years. What did you like about printmaking? And I'm curious about what did you learn from printmaking, that you're utilizing now as a painter?
Ooh, good question. I think with printmaking, it was because I did monotypes, which are essentially one-offs, so I wasn't really even taking advantage of the of what printmaking can offer. But I loved the process of taking images through the press, and I would combine materials and I would combine layers, and then I'd roll it through the press. And what came out sometimes was a surprise because something may squeeze out, or a color may run into another one and create something new and different. So there was a element of surprise to that, as well as just the challenge of getting an image that I was happy with. So I think it's more of experimentation that is the thread that runs with me into my painting experience now. And so I tried a lot of different techniques and subject matter as I started painting and kind of exploring some things, but I was really looking for something that resonated to the point that I could continue to do it for a period of time, and maybe try different approaches and different solutions. But as a body of work, it would hold together for me for a period of time, and that's where the portraiture came in.
So let's talk about the portraits. And I, the viewer can see a selection of the portraits, and to get a sense of size, you really have to see these in person. And that's why we're so fortunate to be able to show the original paintings at the Central Resource Library. Um, how do you decide on the subjects for your portraits, and what kind of research goes into each portrait before you start painting?
Sure. So it was interesting as I began to paint, I would really try to consciously. I'd look at a lot of images and I'd see what I was drawn to, and so I wouldn't question it if an image of a landscape had drawn me in, I would have started painting landscapes. So it was faces that repeatedly drew me in. And as I began to find faces of women from a variety of walks of life that I found so incredibly compelling, what I began to find is that a lot of these women were women I hadn't heard of, who had contributed something significant, and either their work wasn't recognized, or you'd have to really kind of scratch the surface to find out about them. And I wanted to honor them. And so I began to do the portraits as a way of just saying, here's this woman, here's her story, here's what she accomplished. And it just ballooned from there. And I try consciously to make sure that I'm representing as many different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, cultural experiences, that kind of thing, as I try to find subjects for my portrait. Sometimes I will happen upon them. Somebody may give me a name, or I may Google who was a female psychologist who made an indelible imprint on the field of psychology, and then names will pop up, and I'll have to find where is there an image that I could work from that's of a quality level that allows me to actually paint her to make her recognizable. And then I just go from there. So I'll begin to work with what the actual composition will be.
And do you do that through a sketchbook? Do you go through different um, composition ideas? Um, and the backgrounds intrigue me as well, because it seems like there's a lot of thought that goes into the composition, and like the background um, is as important, it seems like, as the person standing in front of it, or it's part of the storytelling. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I've never been an artist that can use a sketchbook. I have to admit,
Uh,
it's never been something that I have been drawn to as a way to solve through images, and I actually see that as a deficit, but it is what it is. So instead of fighting it, I will look for, like I said, I'll look for the a woman that has done something and read about her and find out more about her. And as I'm drawn in and I look at various images of her, I'll land on the image that really speaks to me. And it'll speak to me because it seems to tell that story of what she has accomplished and perhaps somewhat of what she experienced. Or it just gives me an avenue to step into it. And then what I'll do is I use those squares. It started out as more of a gridding process, which is something that a lot of portrait artists will use, but I'll tighten the grid, make it small, and then use that as part of the overall composition, and I just allow it to happen on the canvas itself. So once I've chosen an image that I'm working for, or a set of images, sometimes these are composites, then I began to make sure that it's, her eyes were at a level for a viewer to be able to engage with her. A lot of times I try to start with the eyes because I want to have essentially a conversation with this person to honor what she's accomplished, what she experienced in that time frame, and also to celebrate it honestly, and be able to tell her story more authentically because I'm engaged with her at that level. So it's it's kind of an interesting process. Most of the time it works out. A few times I've had to make some corrections or change something, but they've been minor for the most part. And I'll try to give myself visual challenges along the way so that it's a variation from what I've done in other portraits just to keep it unique and interesting. Sometimes, like on this one, Zikala Sa, that you see here, she was a Lakota Indian and had actually, she's done a lot for the Native Americans, and she was one of the first people to co-compose a Native American opera. So fascinating figure. And I found a portrait of her with her husband in their full Lakota garb. And I wanted very much to paint a full body image of her because she is just so spectacular with her garment and her beads and all of the various accoutrement that she has on. So I wanted to have that impact of being able to feel like you're walking up to an actual individual there standing in front of you. And I wanted the focus to be on her garment and not on the background. So the background became just a gradation behind her so as not to distract from all of the wonderful detail that's going in her dress. So that's just an example. It's kind of a choice in process is what I try to do.
And this one in particular is one that is very striking to see in person. And yeah, you can really get a sense of the details in this one.
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
that
she was a lot of fun.
I'm wondering if what you can tell us about where you paint and what your painting studio or your painting environment is like. Are you
Yeah.
do you paint at home and what is that like?
For the most part, I don't paint at home. I've had circumstances when I've been trying to create quite a few portraits, and I have worked both in a studio and at home. But I have the good pleasure of spending much of my painting days in a studio environment that Robert Quackenbush has created for artists, and it's Studio Q. It's on 71 Highway overlooking downtown. Beautiful setting, beautiful natural light, and we have a great little community of people that come to pursue their artistic expression, and it's really quite an honor to be a part of that. And Robert's there as a mentor and another eye if you want that. And I've certainly taken advantage of that at times as well. He's been a huge supporter, so it's really been wonderful to be able to spend time in that studio space that is so incredibly beautiful, and at the same time a really supportive environment for the kinds of things we each of us pursue, whatever they may be.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I wonder if you can talk about your artistic influences. Who do you look up to um, in art? Who are the other painters who you really admire?
I in the past when I was in printmaking, I followed a lot of the artists at the time, which were primarily men, not surprising. But I think I remember in particular, Helen Frankenthaler was a abstract expressionist painter and then constructionist, and she really grabbed my attention early in my career. Frida Kahlo, of course, with as her degree of creativity and freedom of expression that was remarkable. I also, though, recently there have been some tremendous portrait artists, including Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherrill, that have done the Obama's portraits that I am just taken by. They are such incredible portraitures and accomplished artists. I love seeing what they do and how they treat that very traditional medium, if you will, of portraiture, but have brought it into a contemporary realm and celebrated Black Americans and their contributions. There's another contemporary artist, Gayla Irwin, that has a striking look that I've enjoyed seeing from the standpoint of how to advance my own painting ability and keep moving it forward to have greater expression and greater feeling as part of these stories that I like to tell in a visual sense. So I followed a lot of people through time. I mean, and some people, it's interesting because of my squares that show up in my artwork. You see it here. This is Augusta Savage, she was at the turn of the century with the Harlem Renaissance, played a tremendous role in promoting artists. Many people went to her studio and went on to pursue large careers. But unfortunately, a lot of her work, which was sculptural, was lost to history because it was rendered in plaster rather than bronze. And so the squares here are meant to depict some of that deterioration happening to her sculpture. So I've used the squares in a variety of ways, but because the squares show up in sometimes more intimate in the face itself, people have talked about Chuck Close as being someone that I must have been influenced by. And certainly I always enjoyed the work that he did early on as well, and how he was able to create an image of a face through just basically small shapes and squares. So that was a fascinating approach. So there's a lot of people that have experimented with different visual approaches, and I love seeing that and continuing to watch out for new faces, so to speak, and new artists.
Yeah, you mentioned how you are progressing as an artist, and I was wondering, it might be hard to put into words, but how are you? How do you see your work progressing? Are you working on anything new now that you think is really different from what you've done before?
Well, I'm not yet working on something in terms of physically working on it, but I am playing around with some ideas that would involve different media. And I think that comes out of a desire for growth, a desire to have some variation. I think I will continue to do the portraits of the women because there are so many women to paint. I keep a list on my phone, and I will never be able to complete all of those names and be able to celebrate all of their contributions. So that piece of it is an important thread for me. But in terms of taking it to the next level and taking my art to the next level, I'm just considering some different mediums that would allow me to create something, putting pieces together. So let's just call it that. I'll say that it may be more assemblage based, and I don't yet know if it's going to involve faces or not, but stay tuned, I guess. I'm always trying
Stay
to,
tuned.
I
Yeah.
want to make sure that I'm following my heart and what's speaking to me and what's generating energy for me, because that's important to be able to do the artwork and do the pieces and have them meaningful to me.
Thank you for sharing that. I, in our last few minutes that we have here, Patti, you have recommended a couple of books. You've got one called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and then The Woman Who Smashed Codes. And I was wondering if you could speak to why what spoke to you about these books.
Sure. So The Woman Who Smashed Codes is just like dead on. In fact, I may paint Elizabeth Freeman next, just from the story and the depth of story and what she was able to do during the wars to decode enemy information and messages that were being sent. So she and her husband both contributed greatly to the whole notion of code breaking and how that whole field of study has come into being. And of course, we know more about him than we know about her. So this author, Jason Fagone, got curious about what she did. And through some stunning research, he was able to pull her story together. And it's a really fascinating read. So I highly recommend that from a standpoint of understanding what women have done and often are set aside because, given the times and the culture that woman wasn't supposed to be able to do those things. So, but fascinating story. Braiding Sweetgrass was interesting because I was listening to it on tape as I was painting Wilma Mankiller, who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation for 10 years. And first female to hold that level of position, and also did a tremendous amount for the benefit of the Cherokee Nation. But I was listening to this book on Native culture, on the relationship to the earth. Robin Wall Kimmerer is actually a botanist, and so she combines her scientific knowledge with her indigenous background to share stories of the interaction with nature through her life. And it's fascinating, and I can't recommend it enough if you haven't read it. And if you've actually read the book, then I'd encourage you to listen to the audio version, because her voice is enchanting. And then you get to hear her say the native words in her own voice, and it's just beautiful. So, but it influenced my painting of Wilma Mankiller, because in that image of her face is broken up with a lot of squares, and then in the background you'll see a couple of strips of land behind her, and those are broken up with squares. And the reason is that I was trying to share the idea that the indigenous people are one with the earth, that they don't see that separation as typical those of us from the English and other parts, the Irish and the German and the other parts of the European nation. We don't see it that same way. And so I think that understanding of nature and the understanding of the integration with the earth and the land was something that came through in that artwork of Wilma Mankiller for that reason. So it was an interesting kind of sharing of the two formats, if you will, and how it influenced me as I was literally painting Wilma Mankiller.
Thank you for sharing those stories. We do have both of those books in the Johnson County Library collection, and you can go to jocolibrary.org to place your holds on them, to get them to read them for yourself.
Yeah, they're worth it, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, Patti, thank you for your time here, and it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you. And if If you would like to learn more about Patti, we do have another interview with Patti on our exhibitions blog that's on our Johnson County Library website, along with interviews with all of our other artists that we are showing at our library art galleries. So come on in, and for more information on Johnson County Library programs and services, that is on our website as well, jocolibrary.org. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Bye, Patti.